Nova Scotia's eastern coastline. An incredible 300-kilometer journey from Cape Breton Island to the garrison city of Halifax. A stunning, rugged perimeter along the eastern extremity of Canada's maritime provinces. The coastlines here have it all. Remarkable, remote sandy beaches along this barren shore.
You're alone and it's amazing. It's a beautiful place. Hopefully it'll stay that way.
An island offshore, home to one of North America's rare colonies of wild horses.
Sable Island is a very special and unique environment. This island is so fascinating. There's so much here to learn.
And a deadly wartime legacy. Discarded munitions lining our ocean floors.
There's been in excess of 1 million tons of conventional munitions dumped in the oceans of the world.
Now, we explore this rugged coastline like never before. A bird's eye view, unlocking the secrets of our maritime past, present, and future. This is Canada Over the Edge. On the eastern tip of Cape Breton Island lies the remote village of Louisbourg. First settled in the early 1600s, Louisbourg quickly grew. And within a century, it was the third busiest seaport in the New World. Today, the village's 1,000 residents live in the shadow of that legacy. A massive fortress, one of the last symbols of French rule on Canada's east coast. Covering more than 12 acres, the fortress today was raised from the ashes in a massive reconstruction project in the 1960s. By 1713, France's empire on the east coast was nearly lost. All that remained was Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island. With Louisbourg's strategic location and rich fishing grounds, King Louis XIV declared it capital of the New World. Construction on the fortress began in 1719 and took nearly 30 years. It was barely complete when the attacks by the English began. With undefended hills surrounding the fortress, the English laid siege in 1758. 16,000 troops aboard 150 ships claimed victory, and France's presence in eastern Canada was finished. From Louisbourg, the coastline leads to a peninsula, separating the village from the fury of the sea. This natural breakwater provides shelter for the town, creating the strategic location that attracted both the French and the English. But the open waters here are rough, a hazard to those navigating the seas. Louisbourg Harbor was the site of the oldest lighthouse in Canada, built in 1730. This modern structure has stood for nearly a century. Beyond Louisbourg, it is a vast wilderness. Remote pockets of coastline that roads don't reach. This is one of Nova Scotia's most untouched scenic stretches of oceanfront. At Point Michaud, our aerial survey heads north on a 20-kilometer path to Cape Breton's inland waterway. Soaring high above acres of Cape Breton woodland, a rich palette of colors lies far below. Visitors come here from around the world to experience the serenity and tranquility of a Cape Breton October. Now on the horizon, the island's famous inland water system, the Bredor Lakes, 100 kilometers long and 50 kilometers wide. The lake is a haven for sea life, with a successful lobster and oyster fishery. Its calm waters make it perfect for swimmers and boaters, a recreational paradise. Covering more than 1,000 square kilometers, Bredor was gradually formed as passing glaciers carved a massive crater. Filled in by the waters of the Atlantic over 2 million years, creating one of the largest saltwater lake systems in the world. But not everything is as it seems. These pristine waters conceal a blemish on an otherwise magical stretch of coast. The Bredor Lakes, along with much of Nova Scotia's eastern coastline, was the site of dumping grounds for surplus munitions in the early 20th century.
When we look at the international situation, there's a number of large dumps all around the world in every ocean of the world. And when we look at the Canadian situation, what we have here is a lot of activities that took place during the First and Second World War, and we've never mitigated those areas for munitions to determine that it's safe to continue normal operations. At the time, I think people believed that it was the right thing to do, that it wasn't going to cause any problems. It's hard to quantify the actual amount of stuff that's been dumped, but there are some statements that said there's been in excess of 1 million tons of conventional munitions dumped in the oceans of the world. There are some others that says there's in excess of 500,000 tons of chemical munitions.
Munitions expert Terry Long believes many of these dump sites lie along the eastern Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia.
And if you look at it, what we have down here, all these different color blocks, these are the oil and gas blocks. And here you clearly have some of these dots that interact with petroleum operations, yet there's no mitigation for any of this, or any of those munitions or wrecks in those particular areas. Some suggest that these are some of the largest sites in the world. We're talking thousands of tons here. We're not talking a couple of bombs or torpedoes that are just laying around.
Decades later, Long believes deeper underwater exploration may pose significant risks with lost munitions.
Munitions, for an example, if you take a 1-ton container full of munitions, they have been known to penetrate the seabed up to 3.9 meters. So if you can imagine, we're going out into this one particular area, and for 4 months, in say a mile radius, we're dropping munitions. So now you come over the seabed and you have all these munitions that are close proximity to one another. In these munitions is one munition that is sensitized. You now go over that with seismic and you give it 250 dBs. If you set off that one piece of munition, you now have the potential to have a cascade event.
Back on the surface, a scenic southwest course leads back to sea. This is the region's French heartland, in the Acadian towns and villages along the eastern Atlantic coast. The heart of Acadian culture here is Ile Madame. This 45 square kilometer island lies just offshore. Named after Madame de Maintenon, the wife of King Louis XIV. The first French settlers arrived in the early 1700s. Like Louisbourg, they were drawn to the rich fishing grounds. But the colony would face hardships. Its residents caught up in the war between England and France. More than 4,000 Acadian islanders were forcibly removed and expelled. Today, many residents along this coastline are descendants of the same families that settled here centuries ago. Beyond Ile Madame, the coastline veers northwest towards the industrial region surrounding the link to mainland Nova Scotia. This is the Strait of Canso, a waterway used by mariners and fishermen. Connecting the Atlantic Ocean with the Gulf of St. Lawrence. For centuries, navigators have used this route as a marine shortcut, avoiding the lengthy sail around the tip of Cape Breton. Cutting 70 miles off a voyage inland to the port of Montreal. And since 1955, this has been the site of the Canso Causeway, a 1.3-kilometer stretch of rock connecting Cape Breton with mainland Nova Scotia. Construction began in 1951. 10 million tons of rock and nearly 100,000 cubic yards of concrete would be used in this $22 million post-war engineering feat. As causeway construction progressed, powerful tidal waters were funneled through an increasingly smaller gap, scouring and deepening the ocean floor. With a rock base nearly 250 meters wide, 65 meters below sea level, the Canso Causeway is the deepest causeway in the world. Now beyond Cape Breton, the next phase of this journey begins. This aerial exploration continues along the region's remote eastern Atlantic coast. Now, the next chapter in this journey explores the industrial region surrounding the Canso Causeway. With a price tag of $22 million, the causeway owes its existence to the great engineering minds of the 1950s and to a nearby hillside. Decades ago, blasting on the eastern face of Mount Porcupine revealed an incredible cache of high-quality granite. Plans to tunnel and construct high bridges were analyzed, but in the end, the discovery at Mount Porcupine made a ground-level rock causeway the logical choice. Excavation began immediately, and with each blast, more than 125,000 tons of granite came crashing to the ground. The largest blast using 3,200 cases of dynamite. More than 10 million tons of rock was removed for the causeway. But this was just the beginning. With a deep-water, ice-free port adjacent to the mountain, excavations here would continue. Today, more than 300 million tons of granite remain, enough to keep workers here in business for more than 50 years. Continuing along the western shore of Chedabucto Bay, the scenic coastlines and tiny outposts of Phillips Harbor and Half Island Cove lie below. Next, the community of Canso. Home to just under 1,000 people, it is said to be the oldest fishing port on mainland North America. Set on the easternmost point of the mainland, this was one of the first British settlements in the province and a key site in the ongoing battle between the French and English. Just offshore, the battleground known as Grassy Island. From the air, the remains of the 18th century English fort are still visible. A fort that met its end when the French attacked in 1744. It would be one of the last victories the French would see in the region, as Louisbourg would fall barely a decade later. Continuing southwest, outside the village of Liscombe, spectacular gravel beaches are signatures of this shoreline. Just offshore, a rare glimpse of the deadly maritime hazards this coastline presents. While thousands of ships have grounded and sunk off the waters of Nova Scotia, few remain so exposed and visible. This German merchant marine vessel turned over to Canada after World War II, grounded off Liscombe in 1964. Caught in a winter gale off of Canso, Coast Guard vessels and tugboats watched in vain as the 300-foot ship drifted and grounded on Steering Reef, on what was her maiden voyage under the name Fury. Now, nearly 50 years later, the ship has been eaten away. Sections of hull and the ship's boilers remain, on a stretch of coast famous for its wrecks. Further offshore, Nova Scotia's shipwreck legacy looms large along this 40-kilometer sandbar, known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. Sable Island, the site of thousands of wrecks, has been explored for centuries. But with its remote location and sparse resources, the island has resisted human settlers. Instead, the island is home to one of North America's rare herds of wild horses. No one knows exactly how they got here.
Sable Island is a very special and unique environment. From one day to the next, I probably spend about 80% of my time by myself, with horses or with seals or with birds.
Zoe Lucas is one of the few people to experience life on this island. Her mission is to protect the horses and bring their story to the world.
And I don't think I would be doing that if it weren't for the fact that this island is so fascinating, that there's so much here to learn, so much that I've learned, so much more to learn, so many challenges, so many problem-solving opportunities. it's a privilege to work here because, of course, not everybody can come to Sable Island. If everybody did, it would cease to be Sable Island. I feel that I have a responsibility to share it in some way. So that's why I go back to the mainland and get involved with school presentations and school projects and do public presentations, provide photographs for people's magazine articles and textbooks and things. And it's not as good as being here, but at least it's something that I can do, that I can share it. And I think that there's no question that I have to do that, that's only fair.
Back on shore, the coastline leads to a stone monument and a window to our geological past. More than 20,000 years ago, the most recent ice age saw glaciers pass through this region. The massive mountains of ice headed southward, leaving behind incredible glacial scrapings along the bedrock. These etchings, all heading in the same direction, paint a picture of a forgotten era on the East Coast. An era without vegetation or people, with the maritime provinces covered in sheets of ice kilometers thick. As the ice melted and sea levels rose, thousands of square kilometers of once habited land were lost. Now, all that remains of this era are the glacial signatures breaking the surface on the Atlantic coast. Nova Scotia's eastern Atlantic perimeter. Hundreds of kilometers of rugged terrain. From Louisbourg and Grassy Island to the barren beauty of the eastern shore. This landscape tells the often brutal history of the French and English empires in the region. Now, this aerial exploration heads inland, following the contours of the scenic Liscombe River. Flowing through one of the most rugged sections of the province, the river is situated in a protected reserve area. A unique wilderness habitat for animal and plant life. Surrounded by dozens of lakes, roaring hills, and remote wetlands, the river empties just outside Liscombe into the Atlantic Ocean. Just an hour's drive from Halifax, coastal summer homes and cottages appear along an expanse of shoreline that has often been forgotten. Offshore, fishing vessels patrol the coastline. a viable industry here for more than 4 centuries. Nova Scotia's fisheries continue to be a driving force in the region. Throughout the province, more than 12,000 fishermen in more than 5,000 boats operate here. From massive trawlers down to tiny rowboats. Nova Scotia's exports alone account for nearly $1 billion in sales each year. Along the eastern shore, a rich tradition of sport fishing thrives inland. Enthusiasts come from all over for salmon and trout. Offshore, herring, shrimp, and crab are just a few of the coveted catches. Today, modern fish farms rival traditional methods of harvesting from the sea. And it may be the future here. The cold waters off the eastern shore are ideal for cultivating many species. On a coastline that has seen decline in the traditional fishery, from destructive fishing practices like bottom trawling, also known as dragging.
But I kind of like the word dragging because I think it's pretty descriptive of what the gear does and how you use it. You basically drag fishing gear over the ocean floor to catch species like cod and haddock, other flatfish and shrimp that are on the ground, that are on the ocean bottom. And the gear consists of a net. And on the bottom of the net are rollers, or sometimes what are called rock hoppers, which are big rubber discs which allow the gear to hop over rocks. All this gear is being dragged over the ocean floor, and depending on the size of the vessel and its horsepower, some of these nets can be really large, and they're towed continuously at 2-3 knots, sometimes for 2 or 3 hours over the bottom. It's going to have a profound effect on the ocean floor.
And as technology allowed humans to work deeper and deeper underwater, fishing grounds once out of reach were now fair game.
And the kind of large-scale, industrialized bottom trawling really got underway in the 50s and 60s and seriously took off, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s. And the reason why that happened was the more we fished out our inshore fisheries, really, the more we moved offshore and the deeper we went. So a lot of the fish that we're now catching with bottom trawling or dragging were fish that the market wasn't interested in before because we were selling them and fishing for the shallower species. So it's a sad story really, because it's about us fishing out one area and moving to another and then also fishing deeper. So whether we can keep fishing deeper and deeper and deeper, well, human beings are amazingly clever and often very stupid at the same time. And I think that's what we've done with bottom trawling. It's a very stupid way to fish. And the problem is that we don't know a lot about the deep ocean. We've actually got more maps of the moon than we have of the deep sea floor. So we're working in an area that we know very little about, and scientists think it's probably the largest pool of undiscovered life on this Earth.
Back on shore, continuing southwest, the famous beaches of the eastern shore stretch for miles all along this coastline. Not far away is a natural sanctuary where a team of volunteers takes in injured animals, rehabilitates them, and returns them to their natural environment. It's called Hope for Wildlife.
Well, at a wildlife rehab center, everybody that volunteers is here for the love of animals, but that creates a problem in itself because at a wildlife rehab facility, you're supposed to be sort of hands-off. We do not want these animals going out comfortable around humans.
Hope and her team successfully rehabilitate more than 1,500 animals each year.
The problems we run into are when we get something new in or we have just one of a species in. Then it's really difficult because with raccoons, there is a bit of handling at the very beginning and it doesn't seem to affect the end result. They end up wild, but that's because they go in with a whole bunch of other raccoons and they bond with those other raccoons and they're not bonding with a human being.
More than 15 years since her first rescue, Hope believes her work is just beginning. Now, she is expanding the facility and building for the future.
We've got most of the sides done. We've got the shelter built. We're even incorporating the trees into the unit. And what's really left is just the ceiling.
From the geological marvels and rich fishing grounds of Nova Scotia's eastern shore, this aerial survey continues southwest. This is Martinique Beach, the longest white sandy beach in Nova Scotia. It's more than 5 kilometers long, bordering on a wild bird sanctuary, a migratory stop for black ducks and Canada geese. Along with nearby Lawrencetown, these pristine stretches of coast are quickly becoming known around the world as a top surfing destination and renewing interest in the sport with a whole new generation of Nova Scotians.
The Eastern Shore it's beautiful. It's pretty much undiscovered still. It's rural. Once you leave Halifax, you drive about 45 minutes in either direction, and you're alone, and it's amazing. It's a beautiful place. Hopefully it'll stay that way for a while.
Janine Strickland is an owner at the East Coast's only all-female surf school.
I guess what draws a lot of people out this way is the surfing, and Lawrencetown is pretty well known for the surfing these days. This is the One Life Surf School and Billabong Surf Jam. and it's an all-ladies competition, the only one of its kind on the eastern shore of Canada. And it's just basically to promote the fun aspect of surfing to girls and kind of get them more interested in the water and feeling comfortable with competitions. Well, I grew up here, so I've been coming to these beaches since I was a little kid, but originally it was the waves that finally got me here, and then it was the community and the good people in the community that kept me here for sure. And I remember when I started and there was a couple of the girls in the water and that was it, but now I find you go out and sometimes it's more ladies than guys.
Now, nearly 5 years later, the operation has grown along with the sport on this scenic coast.
I joined on with One Life Surf School a year and a half ago, and it was Janine and a few girls that started it up. And I just decided that I love surfing, so I might as well do it for a living, teaching. I've noticed just in the last year or so that there's a lot of people moving into the area for the surf, and it is drawing a lot of people to the community. So I love the water, so I love being in the water and just enjoying just working on my surfing and practicing different moves and stuff like that. So I love it. It's good.
From Lawrencetown Beach, the approach to Halifax continues. Just minutes from the bustling city. Tranquil, colorful forests and natural beauty lie below. An autumn morning mist over suburban Halifax. Mile after mile, it is a subtle beauty that defines this region and province. From above, the Cole Harbour Lawrencetown Coastal Park System is immaculate. Protected salt marshes that have formed on this inland waterway. Shallow channels of water interspersed with vast floodlands. These stunning marshes have formed over time, with generations of eelgrass dampening the churning waves of the Atlantic, collecting sediments around their roots, and slowly building up soil, creating the shallow waters we see today. And there is human engineering as well. Rail lines, dikes, and bridges have come and gone, changing the ebb and flow of the tides from the nearby ocean, slowly evolving the landscape over the past century. This area has been important for agriculture and fishing since the days of the native Mi'kmaq. Wildlife continues to flourish here, in a peaceful setting between the city and the sea. Finally, the city of Halifax appears on the horizon. This is Hangman's Beach, used in the 19th century to display dead bodies of mutineers for passing ships to sea. A strong warning from this garrison town. It's a city with a rich military past and present, nicknamed Warden of the North. Along the narrows of the harbor, the ships of Canada's East Coast Navy stand guard. And in the background, nearly hidden by modern urban development, spectacular Citadel Hill. In the 18th century, Halifax was one of 4 overseas naval stations of the British Empire. The Citadel was the backbone of Halifax's strategic defense complex. Since then, 4 forts have been built here. This star-shaped incarnation was built in 1856 to defend against a land attack from the United States. In more than 250 years, no shot has ever been fired here. While Halifax has never been attacked, it has not been immune to tragedy. This city was the site of one of the world's greatest disasters. On December 6, 1917, the largest non-nuclear explosion in human history rocked Halifax, killing 2,000 people, changing the face of the city forever. The water below evaporated in an instant, as a World War I munitions vessel was part of a fiery collision. The harbor packed with ships heading to war. But Halifax rebuilt and continues to be the lifeblood of this coastline. It marks the end of a more than 500-kilometer journey. From the French fortress at Louisbourg to the English citadel at Halifax, these sandy beaches magnificent wildlife, and memorials to the past continue to inspire new generations, descendants of those who first settled here. On Nova Scotia's eastern Atlantic coastline.